Hello and welcome to Everybody is a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. If you are new to the pod, thank you so much for giving it a shot, checking it out. I think you have a fun ride, enjoying this with me as I've been going through all these episodes over the last 2 months or so. This is episode 9. So if this is new, your first show, definitely give it a shot. Check out some of the older shows as well. We have some really cool episodes talking about Disney World, talking about going to Philadelphia, talking about celebrity autographs, all sorts of different types of topics. Every week, we kind of keep it free spirited and basically build it around whoever the guest is. Whatever their interest is, whatever they're excited about, that's what we talk about. So that way, hopefully, I can learn, they can learn, and we can share everybody's stories. If you have listened to the podcast before, thank you so much for joining again. Really love it. This is a passion project for me. I'm trying to improve myself, kind of evolve myself as a person, learn, as well as share and take everyone else on this journey with me as well. So as I said, this is episode 9. Next week will be episode 10, and I'm thinking about doing a solo pod. So my thought is I'll probably tell some random stories, kind of maybe talk about some highlights from this podcast as well. Just random stuff from my life and such. If you have any stories that you want to hear about or kind of dig deeper into, send me a message on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. If you want to know more about things, if you want to say hi, I want to shout out again on Instagram, reach out to me that way. Additionally, you can find us on YouTube at Everybody's a Story Pod. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. Everything Jeff Seltzer, you can find over at jeffseltzer.com. You can reach out to me directly via email if you want to be a sponsor, if you just want to kind of send me something or whatever, that's cool. Reach out at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. Additionally, as a reminder, if you're listening to us on Apple or on Spotify, we are also on Amazon. We're on iHeartRadio. We are on some other places as well. Basically, any place that you can find a podcast, you can probably find us at. So definitely share it off to your friends. Let them know it's a fun pod. Do what you can. Definitely trying to get the word out there. Got some new listeners recently. Also, some friends of the show that have been shouting us out recently. So shout out to Marcus Brandon, Dana over at Marked Out Radio, Megan, who was our guest on episode 2. Lots of cool stuff happening out there. So definitely check us out. With that said, I'm really excited about our guest for this week. I'd like to welcome to the show LaTanya Ford. LaTanya, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Jeff?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for asking. So a few weeks ago, I had mentioned on the podcast that one of my coworkers had shot me a note and said, "Hey, I've heard that if I want to know more about podcasting or whatever, you're the person to talk to." And honestly, at that point, I think I'd done about 3 or 4 weeks, and I was like, "Okay, who am I to really talk to about podcasting?" But I guess, I probably know more than the average person, but the average person doesn't know much about podcasting. So that person was LaTanya Ford. So I'm not going to name the company we work at, but if you go to jeffseltzer.com or my LinkedIn, you could find the company we work at. But with that said, LaTanya did reach out to me proactively, which I was really excited about. So LaTanya, once again, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. So LaTanya, if you don't mind, can you give us a little background on who is LaTanya and what makes you happy?
Sure. So my name is LaTanya Ford. A lot of people call me Tanya. I am a mom of twin girls who are 12, and I'm married. We just celebrated our 15-year anniversary.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. I'm an only child, and I think, I don't know, that always people have perceptions about only children. So I always say, I think I break the mold for an only child. I don't mind sharing all of those things. I come from a really big family, though. My mom was one of 6. My mom is one of 6. My dad was one of 9. So I have a whole bunch of cousins and probably one of the only children in the family. So one of the things that I enjoy is being around family, but specifically being around the older people in my family, because as an only child, I spent a lot of time talking to them. So it just became something that I always found fascinating and interesting and a lot of fun and brought me a lot of joy, and still does.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing, LaTanya. So I know we want to talk about, I guess, family, being with family, obviously hanging out with like your parents, grandparents, and things like that. So obviously being an only child, but as you said, you've got a very, very big family. Can you, if you don't mind, taking us a little bit through, I guess, your childhood, right? So obviously being in a house with just, yourself and I assume your parents, it was only, I guess, the 3 of you, but having, lots of cousins and people like that or whatever, kind of like, how did that dynamic work out? And, did you enjoy that?
Sure. So I actually lived also with my grandmother and my aunt. So it made for a really great experience. My grandmother, old school, Southern, very Christian woman. So I like to say I was a church girl, or I am a church girl. And my aunt was a teacher in elementary school, so I always felt like I had my own personal tutor, which was pretty cool. She was always very interested in what I was doing at school and allowed me to really, like, she'd come in from work and we would sit down and just have conversations, even as a really young child. Like, I'm talking 4, 5,
Oh
6 years
wow.
old. And so having that relationship was just very special. And being around my cousins, there would be any given weekend, my family in New Jersey, family in Virginia. Either we were hopping on a plane, People's Airline, I'm probably dating myself a little bit, but we'd hop down to Virginia for super cheap back then. And I'd hang out with my cousins from there that are closer to my age. And then I also had a lot of older cousins on my dad's side that lived in New Jersey, and we'd always get together and do family things.
That's
And I
awesome.
was typically the youngest too. So older cousins, typically the youngest. So my teenage cousins at the time did not want to hang out with this 7, 8 year old. So I ended up hanging out with the adults.
So with that, I guess you probably grew up fairly quickly then. So it was probably a case of you were the youngest. So I mean, I know my kids when they were younger, if they were around older kids, they would kind of age up. Versus if they were around like a lot of younger kids, they'd oftentimes age down. In your situation, you were the youngest. So did you almost feel like you grew up faster than you probably would have? Did you kind of see things that you normally wouldn't have, things like that?
I would say it's funny, from the age up standpoint, it wasn't even so much that I was hanging out with my older cousins. It was I was hanging out with their parents.
Sure.
So
Right.
it was like I was really aging up and having conversations with adults, basically, which yeah, you probably heard some things that maybe I wasn't supposed to hear as a little kid, but also got to see like the dynamics and interpersonal relationships with people. So I did a lot of observing as a kid, which was fun. And actually, I use a lot of that now, kind of taking in what's going on around me rather than just making an assumption.
Nice, nice. So to that point, you had said it was yourself, it was your parents, it was your aunt, it was your grandmother. So living with multiple generations in the house growing up, like I guess what was that like? So I would assume growing up with like your grandmother in the house, for example, you probably didn't have the traditional grandmother granddaughter relationship because you saw her all the time, right? It
Yeah,
wasn't like I guess other people like myself growing up. Like I saw my grandparents, let's say a lot less frequently than every day.
yeah.
Like, did you almost see her almost like as a second mom, or kind of like how was that kind of set up?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will say, as I got older, she became like one of my best friends who I could
Oh,
talk to and hang out with. She just had a lot of wisdom, and it was just interesting to be around her. Like, very Christian woman, always had a lot of sayings. Actually, did a LinkedIn series of posts that was hashtag Grandma Said.
oh wow.
And it reflects on some of her favorites, or I don't know if they were her favorite sayings, but they were my favorite sayings of her. Things like think twice, speak once. She would also say things like, if a task is once begun, never leave it till it's done. Be the labor great or small, do it well or not at all. And I find myself now telling my kids the same things.
Right, right,
So it's just interesting because as you get older, I feel like the older people are the ones that have the sayings. They have the ways of doing things. They can say things without holding back because they don't really care what anybody else thinks about what they're about to say. They're just going to say it.
right.
And I always admired the fact that she never hid her age. So it was, yes, this is how old I am. Yes, I'm 80 years old. And it's like, oh, you look good for 80. And I'm like, I can't wait till I reach the age where, like, I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm just going to say what I mean and mean what I say. And if you don't like it, you'll figure it out.
Sure, of course.
Obviously, not in being mean, but it's just that, you give a little grace to the older people when they say things.
Absolutely. So yourself growing up with again multiple generations in your house, I assume, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, or if I, overreach, definitely let me know. In your house right now, with like yourself and your kids, is it basically yourself, your husband, and your kids? Do you have any other family with you, or is it just the four of you?
Just the four of us.
So do you see or do you feel that your kids have, I guess, a different growing up situation because they don't have, I guess, as many people, right? They don't have a grandmother or an aunt in the house. Like, do you see them either? I guess it's a different lifestyle, right? A different kind of relationship. Like, how do you think they get it? And do you kind of always tell them stories about how growing up grandma was here and aunt so and so was here and stuff like that? Like, how does that go down?
Yeah, so it's interesting because when the girls were born, they had both sets of grandparents and two great grandmothers.
Oh wow.
So that's something super special. I only had the one grandmother. Everyone else had passed away
Gotcha.
prior to me being born. So I always would tell them they're really lucky. And now they still have one great grandmother, and they share the same birthday, by the way. So I tell her all the time I gave her the best birthday gift ever.
Oh,
And they also have both of their grandmothers still living, and they're very close to them. They spend a lot of time with them. My mom is Grammy Pammy, and my husband's mom is just grandma.
okay.
And they love spending time with them. And I think even though it's a different situation compared to when I was being raised, it's still a fun one where they're able to enjoy and be around and gain the wisdom from having those relationships.
Of course. Is most of your family in Jersey? I know you said earlier that you had family in Virginia. Like, is it a little closer than it was then, or is it still kind of throughout the East Coast?
So most of my dad's family lives in New Jersey, a couple of people down in the Maryland, Virginia area. Most of my
Okay.
mom's family lives in Virginia.
Got it. So I assume then, since it sounds like you're very family oriented, that you probably travel down to Maryland and Virginia a decent
Yes.
amount of times to go see family, hang out, catch up, stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Nice. Does do your kids? So I think you said your daughters are 12. They're twins. Do they
Mhm.
have cousins? I know you had said that you came from a big family, so they have a lot of cousins that are their age, older, younger. Kind of like, what does that setup look like?
So they have probably not as many cousins their age as I did when I was younger, but they do. One of my cousins, who actually is a twin
Okay.
and has a set of twins, twins run in the family. She also has another son. So there are three of them, and they're close to the girls' age. The girls are still older, but they have so much fun visiting. We call them the Lee Five. So when we go down there, they have a great time. Usually, everybody will come here for Thanksgiving, and they just really enjoy being together. We actually just came back earlier this summer from Columbus, Georgia, where my husband had a huge family reunion.
Okay.
So that was, like, I don't know, over 150 people, and they do this
Wow.
every year.
150 people?
Oh yeah, yes, yes.
That is a big family.
Small town, Phoenix City, Alabama. Distant cousins, but definitely, you feel the love. It's a lot of fun. This was the first family reunion for the girls that they were old enough to really appreciate and enjoy and have fun with, and so it was a good time.
Wow. I'm just blown away by 150 people in your family. Like I grew up in a smaller family, let's say. Like one side of my family, I have an aunt who never had any kids. Was married for a short time but never had kids. On my wife's side, she has two uncles who never got married or had kids. So for me, just picturing 150 people that I'm related to or have any kind of family connection to, the numbers or the math just kind of blows me away. But it's incredible that you guys have that, and it's just awesome to hear about.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like I said, I'm an only child, and
Right.
my husband only has one brother, a younger brother, and they have one. They just had a baby. He's a year old. So the girls only have one first cousin, compared to the 20, 30 first cousins that I had.
Right.
So our family, though, it's big. So for instance, one of our I think she's like my fifth or sixth cousin is coming to visit this weekend.
Wow.
But we have this relationship. Her grandmother and my grandmother were first cousins, and so we kind of grew up together, and the rest is history. So lots of ties a long way down the line.
That's crazy. So I think you probably mentioned it before we went on the air, but I think you said you're celebrating your 15th wedding anniversary this year. Is that
Yeah,
correct? So first of all, congratulations. That's awesome to hear.
thank you.
With that said, though, so getting married 15 years ago and having such a huge family, how big was your wedding? Like, I would imagine, like, you kind of have to, like, people have an A list, a B list, a C list. But if you have that many family members, it's tough to kind of cut people off, right?
Yeah, it was. We had 300 people at our wedding.
Wow.
Um, like I said, family is super important to me.
Of
It's super
course.
important to my husband. We were so excited to bring everybody together. It was like a big family reunion. The list was very difficult, and looking back, it's like I'm glad that we were able to have so many people there because so many people have passed on.
Right.
But that list, you talk about wedding planning. That was the hardest piece. Was like, okay, who doesn't get invited?
Oh,
Um,
I'm sure. I'm just trying to find a hall big enough for 300 people and just like paying for it. Like that's a lot of
yeah.
numbers there.
Yes, it was a lot of numbers. We had our wedding in the morning,
Okay.
so price is a little bit cheaper, which made it nice, and we were able
Yeah.
to get everybody in. Had a great time, danced and partied hard. That's
Awesome.
one thing that we both have in common. It's like we're gonna have a great time if we get together, and we're definitely getting on the dance floor. So
That's great.
that was a
Yeah.
great time.
You guys doing anything fun for your 15th wedding anniversary, or just kind of going out for dinner, or kind of like any thoughts yet?
We so it was August 8th, and
Oh,
we went to Grand Cayman Islands for
that's awesome.
vacation together while the girls were at sleepaway camp. So it was a very nice, relaxing time on the beach. Yeah, great way to celebrate 15 years.
That does sound amazing. Does sound amazing. So I know you had said, again, growing up, you had, older folks in your household. You had your grandmother, your aunt, your parents, and such like that. Um, so having so many generations in your house, like as you got older, right? So obviously you were little, we get older, things happen, things like that. Like, did you see things growing up that you're like, that'll never happen to me? Then you hit a certain age and like, oh snap, it did happen, right? Like, obviously, I'm 46. Like all of a sudden, I start getting gray hair. Like little things happen that you're kind of like making jokes about as a kid, and you're like, I'm immortal, nothing will ever happen. And then all of a sudden, it does, and you're like, wait, I saw this 30 years ago. This wasn't supposed to happen to me.
Right, right. Yeah, so it's funny because now that I have kids and they're 12, they can't let a day go by without calling me old. In the olden days,
Right.
I'm not that old. And then I'm like, gosh, I guess I am really old to you as a 12-year-old.
I mean, to that point, I always joke with my kids that I was born in the late 1900s, right? So I was born in 1977, which I mean, at this point, it's 5 decades ago, which is insane.
Yeah.
But like just calling it out, like, growing up, I went to school, graduated high school in 95. Like if somebody talked about the late 1800s, I'd be like, well, that was like so long ago. But let's say the late 1900s or the 20th century, it definitely makes it sound like it was long ago or longer ago than it actually was,
Yeah, I'll be 45 this year. So
Yeah.
that like,
Welcome to the club. Absolutely.
yeah, it's like, oh, how did I get here? It seemed to happen so quickly. And yes, there are definitely the things you hear people say, like, oh, enjoy your 20s. Like, you kind of eat what you want. It's not that big of a deal. But when you get to your 30s, or now that you're 40, you wake up out of the bed and it's different. I saw a really great meme where it's like, when you're young, you fall down the stairs and it's like, oh man, I'm okay, I'm good.
Right.
And I was like, now you sneeze wrong and suddenly you have to go to the chiropractor.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always tell people that, like, for me, like, so I was always super thin. Like when I was younger, I could eat anything. I couldn't put weight on. Like when I was younger, I tried to and I just couldn't. I probably hit around 39 or 40. And like, I just think about food and I gain 2 pounds.
Right.
Like, it's just crazy just how like your body kind of wakes up one day and says, you know what, I think we're done.
Yeah.
You're not getting those advantages anymore. The way I look at it, this is probably more morbid than it probably should be, but it kind of is I think a lot of it has to do with that humans aren't supposed to live this long, or like naturally it just doesn't happen, right? So think about it, right? Modern science and medicine have kind of helped to elongate life, right? Like years ago, people would die of, I don't know, chicken pox or probably some, malaria, whatever else like that, right? We found ways around that, but we haven't found ways around some of the other ailments that we still suffer from, right? So like arthritis, things that we obviously people suffer from, we kind of work around. Obesity, right? Like people, I don't think 500 years ago lived long enough to be super obese. Like things just changed. People, I mean, what we eat. You can do a whole podcast about kind of eating, I'm sure, but it's a case of like even like little things like braces, right? Like I'm sure getting braces and getting wisdom teeth pulled, like people probably died from like a tooth infection because their wisdom teeth got infected, right? Yeah. Versus nowadays, for the most part, your wisdom teeth start coming in, you get them taken out. So it's things that like years ago, people will just die of quote natural causes at like 20. Like those natural causes aren't really so natural anymore. So we haven't really found ways around those issues now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because my grandmother's best friend just passed away recently.
I'm sorry.
This year, but she passed away at 104.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a long life. That's great.
It's a long life. Yes. And she passed away not on any medication, not on any regular doctor's visits. She was driving well into her 90s. She grew food in her garden and she was very health conscious and health minded. She would exercise and walk and all of those things. And her name was Ma Mason. Like everybody called her Ma. And it was just like amazing to see this woman. Like you said, most people lean on modern medicine for one thing or the other. And she was able to carry on at such an old age and still have her wits about her as well, which is really cool.
That's great to hear, because I mean, to your point, I mean, so many people, it's been normalized. And again, I have no opinion on it, but if you need it, you need it, I guess. But whether it be for heart medicine or cholesterol or blood pressure or whatever, I mean, science has found a way to kind of like, again, elongate life and to kind of make us better, when 100 years ago you would have been dead for some of these things, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that the person that you're talking about was able to live like well into her her early hundreds, to your point, driving into her 90s, like that's insane. Like people say, do you want to live to be 100? I'm like, if I live to be 100, I want to have like a good 100 years. Like if I live to be 100 but at 70 I start kind of hitting the wall, like that's not really the kind of life that I'd be looking for. So that's amazing. That's great that she was able to kind of live that long, but also live like a positive and happy and just a good life, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's definitely it was just it was amazing to watch her and to see and to be able to have those conversations with her, because to your point, if I'm going to live to 100, I want it to be good. I don't want to be in poor health and not feeling great, and that's not fun. So
it isn't. And I'd imagine, so again, if I get too much into this, just let me know. So this is your grandmother's friend, you said, right? Your grandmother's
yes.
friend. So it's one of those things where, like, obviously when someone passes away, you're sad, right? You're like,
Mhm.
we're going to lose this person. But when someone lives to be 105, like, none of us are going to live forever. So it's one of those things where you're kind of like, at least I assume, like, it stinks that we lost this person. I love this person. This person was great, but this person was still in relatively good shape, and this person had 105 good years. So I'd imagine it's probably mixed emotions at that point, that they lost the person, but you have to lose them at some point, right?
Right. I mean, it's we have what we call a homegoing service, so not just a funeral, but it's like a celebration of life for her. And
Right.
it's that whole thing of like, she lived a fantastic life. She gave back. She always looked to help people. She always was teaching people something.
Right.
So while of course, like, you miss the person, it's just, you can't help but say, like, she lived a good life, and thank God that she had her wits about her. She wasn't sick and all of those things. So definitely hurts, but at some point you got to celebrate the life that the person was able to live. That's how I look at it. Regardless of the age, you got to celebrate that life, because there's so much that happens there.
Yep.
You'll miss the person, but oftentimes, one of my aunts, my aunt Dee, she actually lives in the same town that I do, and she's in an assisted living facility. She's having a little trouble with her memory. She's 88 years old.
Wow.
And whenever I go to visit her, she's always so excited, and we have a conversation, and she reminds me, she's like, you're living a good life. These are not the best years, but these are like really good years, and make sure that you soak it up. And so I always take that and try to remember, even on the hard days, like I mentioned earlier, my girls weren't feeling well.
Yep.
These are some of the best days of my life. These are good days in my life, even in the hard times. So yeah, just try to take that wisdom from living the best that you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great call out. So, like, one thing that I read is, I think it was a meme, but I kind of feel there's some truth to it, is that, like, for your kids, again, I have two kids, 16 and 14, like, in their lifetime or your lifetime, you're going to spend 19 years with them. The first 18 years are going to be with you, and that last year will be over the course of like 50 years, right? Or 40 years, something like that. So make the most of those 18 years where you can, because otherwise, that last year you have with them is going to be broken up over so much time. You're never going to get that much continuous time with them for the most part.
Yes. And it goes by so fast. I blinked and they're 12. And somebody said to me, like, the number of first days of school that you have. And it's like, oh my goodness, like, they're going into 7th grade, and it's going really fast, and just wanting to savor those moments. And I think, we talked about it a little bit, but as they get older, the relationship changes.
Yes.
So when they were 7 and 8, they couldn't get enough of my time.
Yep.
They wanted to spend that time with me. Now that they're 12, it's sort of like, oh, can I go over so-and-so's house? We dropped them off at a barbecue last weekend that we were invited to.
Definitely an evolution. It definitely changes. Like, my older daughter is 16. She'll take her driver's test next month, which is just insane to me. Right. So for me, it's mind boggling. It's like, okay, how am I old? First of all, I think, how am I old enough to have a kid that could possibly get a driver's license? Right. So, like, she has her driver's permit. She drives with us in the car, which for me is still kind of like, mind numbing, that I'm like, how is this even possible? Because, you oftentimes think back to when they were, a newborn, or when they were little, and you're like, wow, they were that small or that little not that long ago. And now she's driving a car, which is just crazy.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's even little things like, we're starting to talk about like college with my older daughter. She's a junior in high school. So we're kind of starting to say like, okay, where do you want to go? Where should we kind of visit? Stuff like that. And I mean, she doesn't want to hear it yet because, again, it becomes real then, I guess, is probably what it is.
Yeah.
But still, like, we're taking college tours with her this year, which for me is just kind of like, wow, so this is real. Like, this is legit. And this could possibly be it. So, like I said before, like, you get 18 years continuous and then 1 year broken up over the course of, the rest of their lifetime. So to your point, make the most of what you have, because at some point, they're going to start their own family. They're going to do their own thing. They'll have a job. I mean, we're even looking at like for summer vacations. So this past year, we went to Tokyo, Japan for summer vacation back in June, July. The main reason, or one of the main reasons we did it, was we look at it like, okay, so she's going to be a junior in high school. How many more family vacations do we actually have together, right? It's a very weird thing to think about. But it's like, I look back to when I was a kid and I was like, okay, so when I was 17 or 16 years old, from that point on, how many family trips did we have? Not that many after that. So I'm like, okay, if we have a few more left, let's make them bigger and better and create memories. So kind of figure out how to make that work. It's just, I mean, I get in my own head with that oftentimes, but it's just crazy to think about that. Like, totally get it, the circle of life, right? At some point, she'll leave the house, she'll start her own family or do whatever she wants to do. And she may or may not want to go on vacation with her parents. So it's a case of, and for me, like as a parent, I look at it and say, like, that's completely natural. And I'm happy for her to make her own decision. If she wants to visit us or go away with us, I'm more than happy to. But I would never force it, because I'm like, you know what? She's her own person. She should do what makes her happy. If she wants to see us for Thanksgiving, that's great. If she doesn't, I completely understand that she probably has other people to see as well. There's always Black Friday or Saturday or Sunday or whatever else like that, right? So, try to give her the flexibility, but give her the space, but also let her know that, hey, she's always welcome,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's just crazy to think about.
It is. And it goes so fast. It goes so fast.
It does. It does. Any other stories that you'd like to share, or anything else that you've experienced that you kind of want to talk about? I know earlier you talked about, you wrote a few stories on or articles on LinkedIn with hashtags and such. Anything that you want to kind of promote or talk about that you were sharing through that?
So I'll share just one story that I was telling my girls the other day. I'm big on kindness. So you never know what people have going on in the world. And sometimes being kind, saying a kind word, giving someone a compliment, just being polite at the register at checkout can really make a big difference for someone.
Yep.
And being rude or mean can also have a really big negative impact for someone. So my core value is, how can I be as kind as possible in my interactions with people, regardless of who they are, regardless of how my day is going or how their day is going. I can always bring a smile and a kind word. I was probably around 11 or 12, and I was interested in baking. And so I found a recipe, and I baked some zucchini breads, and I put them in the little pans. And I was like, oh, these are like nice, and I could give them to somebody if I wanted to. And one of my grandmother's friends who had like older kids, and they didn't often come to visit, she was like, oh, I'm going to see my friend. And she was like, do you want to come by? And I was like, okay, sure. And I was like, you know what? I'll bring her a zucchini bread. And I brought the zucchini bread over. Again, 11, 12 years old, just thinking like, this is something I can do to be nice to someone else. And when I left her house, she gave me a check for $500.
Oh, wow.
And said, thank you. And, I really appreciated your visit and your kindness. And so I don't say that to say every time you do something. I mean, I wish it was that easy. I'd probably hope to be a millionaire by now. But
of course.
It's the impact that you have on other people in the kindness that you do. And it's always a reminder to me that, like, she was going through a hard time, and me bringing her a small zucchini bread really made her day. I try to go visit my aunts or my husband's grandmother in an assisted living facility, and the joy that's on their face when I walk through the door, it's like I just did the best thing ever. And I don't know, it makes me feel good as well. So I just like to share, be kind to people, find something to do to just make someone's day and spread that kindness, because you never know what people are going through, and it can make a really big difference.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I couldn't agree with you more. Like, I live by very similar values and very similar thoughts. Like, for me, I totally believe in like karma and like paying it forward, and the fact that, like, for me, I don't expect anything in return, but like anybody who shows any need for help, whatever, I try to help out. Yes. Even little things like on LinkedIn, like if I see someone on my network that shares like, hey, I'm looking for a job, I'll just repost it. Or if someone's like, hey, anyone want to anybody looking to work in this job, I'll repost it. Anybody I can connect that maybe naturally wouldn't get connected, whatever I can do, if I can change someone's life, make them happy, things like that. I mean, side story, a few years ago, I was laid off. And I remember personally, like, there weren't that many people that were out there to help me out. And I remember how, let's say, not so great that felt.
Mhm.
So I always had the mentality of, I don't want anyone to ever feel that way. Like, if anybody ever reaches out, I will do whatever I can to connect people. Not even like at work to kind of get the referral bonus, but just in general, like whether it's with us, whether it's with a competitive company. I have 2,000 connections on LinkedIn. Chances are there's somebody I can connect them with that can help them out, either get them a job or to find them somebody who can help them get a job. Whatever it is, like I just try to kind of, again, help out because I figure the universe is small. We all know each other. We're not here that long. Let's just try to make the most of it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the people on the receiving end truly appreciate that piece of kindness. I think Maya Angelou had a quote that says, people may not remember what you say, but they remember how you made them feel. And so I try to live by, like, I hope when I interact with people, it makes them feel good and not bad. Simple principles.
No, that's great. I do love that too. Again, I mean, to your point from before, we don't know what people are going through. Another example also I'll say is like whenever, let's say I'm in a situation where customer service could help me more than they do, like if I go to a hotel and they mess up my room or whatever else like that, like I fully recognize the person I'm talking to
Yes.
is just customer service. Like they didn't mess up usually. They're not the person who's going to fix it or whatever. So I keep that in mind. And I always tell them, I'm like, look, this is not me yelling at you or commenting at you. I recognize you are just a part of this company, but I want to make sure that you're telling the people that can make the impact, this is what's going on. Like, this is not against you personally. This is the company you're representing. I want to make sure everyone's clear that, you know, no matter how upset I am, I do de-escalate the situation. So that way I understand and they understand that, like, this is not, life is tough enough as it is. Work is tough enough as it is. We both have bad days. We both have good days. I want to make sure that everybody comes out of it and recognizes, okay, this wasn't great. We did the best we could with it. Nobody got aggressive. Everybody was professional and we made the most of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I always smile when I see other people doing that out. I was in Target the other day and someone gave the cashier just tongue lashing for no reason. It's like the person's trying to check out.
Sure.
Maybe they weren't able to answer the question that you wanted and how you wanted it done.
Right.
But they were very rude, and the person following them kind of like apologized for the person. They're like, I'm sorry you had to deal with that. And you could see the cashier went from being like really sad and down to kind of like brightening up a little bit as the rest of us acknowledge that behavior was unacceptable.
Absolutely.
So sometimes even just that helps to bring a little bit more light to someone's life. That was one of my grandmother's sayings that I also posted on LinkedIn. If each of us could light a candle, what a brighter world this would be. So I consider the work that I do as just like, or, you know, interacting with people, lighting someone's candle and just bringing light.
That's awesome. I mean, that's really great to hear. And again, without naming the company we work for, one of our catchphrases we have at work is keeping it human, which I always try to kind of remember that, like, you know, no matter what you're going through or they're going through, at the end of the day, we're human. People have families, people have sicknesses, whatever else like that. Like, not everybody exposes or shares what they're going through. So if, let's say, they drop the ball on a project or forget something, whatever else like that, if it happens once or twice, it happens, right? The world isn't going to end. We're going to fix it. We'll figure it out. We'll move forward. You know, no reason not to try to, you know, get better together and just fix it together. So that's kind of, you know, what we live through. So
yeah, it's so interesting that you tell that story. My husband had a coworker and he noticed like something seemed a little bit different. He wasn't responding and wasn't engaging in the way that he normally does. And so they were meeting for something. And he was like, hey, before we get started, he was like, I just want to check in. He was like, how are things going for you? And you could see his coworker just kind of exhaled and said him and his family had been living in a hotel because there was like water damage to their house and it had been a little bit crazy. And he's like, I'm trying to balance, you know, everybody in a hotel. You know, he had a couple of kids and his wife. And so he was like, thank you for asking. And it's like one of those things where maybe you're not sharing it with everybody, but just being kind to somebody in those moments instead of being like, oh, you dropped the ball. And it's like, give people some grace,
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you for sharing that. Again, couldn't agree with you anymore. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything you want to support or promote before we end the pod for today?
Sure. So I am a part of a company called 3D Intent. It's 3D Intentionality. It's actually a company I created, and it's all about being intentional with who you are, helping other people be their best selves. It's around coaching and just really supporting people through their career journeys and being able to help light the lights of others as I go throughout the day.
That's great. How can people find out more about this company? How can people, I guess, follow you either on social or however it's set up?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, LaTanya Ford. You can email me at 3dintent@gmail.com.
Any Instagrams or anything for the company, or just the LinkedIn?
Instagram, yes, just getting started. It's
Okay.
3D Intent on Instagram, like the number 3, the letter D, and then intent. Or you can also find me at Mrs. Essence BC on Instagram as well.
Sounds good. I'll make sure to tag 3D Intent on Instagram when I post this podcast so everyone can find it.
Okay.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I appreciate that, LaTanya. So quick close here for anybody out there that's still listening. Hopefully you still are. Once again, thank you so much for joining. All the feedback we've gotten so far really does mean a lot. Really, really happy. Like I said, this has been a bit of a personal project for me in terms of trying to evolve, trying to learn as much as I can, trying to share other people's stories, share my stories, things like that. Want to reiterate, we have some fun guests coming up next couple of weeks. Again, I'll have a solo pod in a couple of weeks. So if you have any questions or stories you want to hear about, let me know. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. The show Instagram is at Everybody Has a Story Pod. For all things Jeff Seltzer, you can go check me out at jeffseltzer.com. Outside of that, I hope everybody has a great week, and we'll talk again next week. Thank you so much. Bye.